go back to something you said, which I found really interesting about what you did in Texas. You mentioned the new speaker, and it's my understanding that the Democrats came together to support a speaker this time, so who was elected with a good chunk of Democratic support and less Republican support than maybe someone else would have gotten. In this idea that they were is going to be a little bit of power sharing, which seems really actually kind of heartening given our current environment of this divisiveness and parties pitting against each other. So how did that come about, and how has that been so far? Has it been, as you did talk a little bit about the power the vice chairs have, which is really interesting, but how has been the experience kind of just working with the new speaker?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you, my first session, last session, 88th legislative session in the Texas House was very bipartisan to begin with. Speaker Phelan was bipartisan, gave Democrat chairmanships, but a handful of Democrats, like let's say 8 Democrats had chairmanships out of 30 something committees, right? So when he was sort of targeted for various reasons, the voucher is a big fight that we had last session, and Democrats and rural Republicans were able to fight that and kill the voucher bill during a special session in 2023. I think that, along with other things, Attorney General Ken Paxton, we had, sort of voted to impeach, and a lot of Republicans had voted to impeach. So there was a lot of turmoil in the Republican Party. And because of that, 15 of moderate Republicans were unseated in their primary. And so that made the House a bit more conservative. So there was 3 factions, right? You've got Democrats, you've got moderate Republicans that like the bipartisan nature of the House, and then you've got far right conservatives that had appointed maybe one of the speaker candidates. And then Democrats were concerned, how should we vote with that? So we have to vote for a Republican speaker. Obviously, Democrats don't have enough votes, and like I said, that we lost 2 seats as Democrats in the Texas House. We had 64 Democrats, now we're 62. So we had to elect somebody Republican, but I think there were a couple of choices in front of us, and Speaker Dustin Burrows was someone that we felt was more bipartisan. And Democrats being chairmen or chairwomen were something that the Republican Party was not going to go ahead with, right? I'm not talking about the party itself, but the constituents. And so we want to make sure that these Republicans also come back next session, and then they're not, primaried and whatnot. So that's how we voted for Speaker Dustin Burrows, and he allowed Democrats. He said, in fact, in the rules, it said that only Democrats can be vice chairs, and only Republicans can be chairs, right? So that's how we were able to have this, and we have a budget, which has never happened before. So it's a very unique circumstance, and it is heartening to see that, because I'm not surprised though, because Texas works in a very different way. So I'll give you an example. There were 900 to 1,000 bills that were passed in the session last session. 90% of them were bipartisan. So that tells you the how we work together in the Texas House. We're not like U.S. Congress.
Yeah. Do you feel like constituents understand that? Do you feel like that there's pressure? You kind of mentioned like the Republican Party wouldn't go for that. Do you feel like that the electorate in Texas matches the way that the House works?
I think you're right. I don't think they understand what goes on in the House and why politics is different than policy, right? When we're running for office, we say, oh, we're going to fight for this and fight for that, and we're going to our constituents and saying all the things that they want to hear, or more partisan rhetoric, right? Because these districts are so partisan. Like my district is 60% Democrat, right? So what can tend to happen is state representatives become very partisan, right or left, during when they're running for office. When they're elected, when they're sworn in, then politics should switch off and policy should start, which is not understandable for mass majority of the Texans. But I think it is unfair that there's so much polarization in our state, in our country, and that's what makes it that way. Like, for example, I didn't have a Republican opponent in my election, so I knocked on Republican doors and I said, hey, you don't have anybody from a nominee from your side. I'm here to serve you. It doesn't matter. The policies that I file are very bipartisan. And so they really appreciate that. And I got so many text messages on the election day saying that you were the only Democrat all the way down the ballot that we voted for. We didn't vote for any Democrat except you. And so I think that's where more people need to sort of be an example of that and let constituents know. And I told them, hey, 90% of what we file or what we actually pass in the House is bipartisan. And they were really surprised to know that. So this session, I'm trying to do a lot of communications to my constituents and letting them know what we're doing in the Capitol to sort of demystify some of that things and sort of tone down that temperature that is really causing us to be sort of partisan divide.